Today's devotional is entitled, Who Am I? Now, I've looked in the mirror and just kind of stared at myself and looked at every imperfection that there is, and the thoughts just kind of go through your head as they're just as bad as those imperfections. I'm not good enough. No one loves me. No one cares what I do. Why do I even bother? And what purpose do I have? And before you know it, these cascading thoughts just start to overwhelm you, and suddenly you're on this slippery slope, and some of you here could very well be on that slippery slope. You're just almost a thought away from making a decision that you have no way of coming back from. We all have thoughts that we wish we didn't have. We are truly our own worst critic, and once we get these thoughts in our head, it's really hard to get rid of them. Who am I to think that I'm good? Who am I to think that someone thinks that I have value or even worth? Who am I to think that someone loves me? And see, the Bible is filled with people that had the same thoughts, that their lives were so meaningless that God would never use them, that their flaws outweighed their strengths. Elijah was a great man of God, but he dealt with some serious character flaws that he had. He had fear. And even after the Lord used Elijah in defeating the gods of Baal and bringing rain to the area, he still had fear for his life. He thought, how am I going to get through this moment? Thomas was a disciple of Christ, one that was hand-selected by Jesus, and yet throughout the New Testament, he's known as Doubting Thomas because he wrestled with the truth about what Jesus told him about raising from the dead. Thomas thought, how am I going to believe you when I saw you die? And Mary and Martha were very close to Jesus. They saw many of his miracles, but when they sent word to Jesus that their brother was deathly ill and then ultimately see him die before Jesus could arrive, they thought, how am I supposed to believe this man when he allowed our brother to die? Each and every one of these examples shown that even in the midst of amazing things that the Lord did in their lives, they thought, who am I? Who am I? Well, guys, let's flip those two words from who am I to who I am. Who I am in Christ flips the script, takes bad situations in our lives and allows the glory and majesty of God to do amazing and wonderful things. And Philippians 2:13 says, for God is working in you, giving you the desire to obey him and the power to do what pleases him. You see, when we look at those examples, they took their eyes off of the Lord and only looked at themselves. They were looking at a mirror and only saw themselves, which caused them to go down that slippery slope. Elijah fleeing for his life, Thomas not believing that Christ really raised from the dead, and Mary and Martha having selfish thoughts about why Jesus didn't show up to save their brother. But who I am in Christ allowed Elijah to do wondrous things, even when Elijah was scared and on the run, only looking for himself. God helped him. In 1 Kings 19:3-9, it says, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the desert, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around and saw some bread baked on a hot stone and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, for there is a long journey ahead of you. So he got up, ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Then he came to a cave where he spent the night. Even though Elijah feared for his life and fled, God still provided for him. At the time that Elijah needed the help the most, God provided for him. But who I am in Christ allowed Thomas to see that Jesus truly did raise from the dead. John 20:24-29 says, one of the disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." And he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here and see my hands. Put your hand into my wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who haven't seen me and believe me anyway." Even though Thomas needed to see the proof that Jesus had risen from the dead, who I am in God encourages us to have faith even when we doubt. And lastly, about Mary and Martha, who I am in Christ allowed them to see the full picture of the death and resurrection of Christ. The death of Lazarus happened so Christ could show his disciples that Jesus had power over death. To show that when Jesus would defeat death, that the way to the Father is through him. In John 14:6 says, Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." Even though Mary and Martha were upset with Jesus for letting Lazarus pass away, who I am in God shows us that even in death was defeated by Jesus so that we could be with him forever and ever. So who am I? No. Stop thinking like that. Change it to who I am. Because you're wonderfully made. You're loved by the Father. You're cared for. You're thought about. You are amazing when your life is in Christ. In Genesis 26:24a says, "Where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival, I am the God of your father Abraham. He said, do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you." So guys, flip the script. It's not who am I, it's who I am in Christ. It'll give you the courage to look in the mirror and see that God sees a perfectly made human, made in his own image. That is our devotional for today. Who am I?